So I don't want to talk too much about myself, but I have to say this lesson so speaks to me. I think at this time together, when we're all under such pressure and anxiety, I believe it speaks in some ways to all of us. We spend an entire life, some of us, studying and thinking and praying and attempting to build a spiritual interiority so that we can respond to the world around us. Many of us learn early on that it's very hard to change other people and to change the world. And the best way you can do it is to change yourself. I think a lot of us have had some successes in our spiritual lives and feel a certain kind of strength and interiority. And we're grateful for that. And sometimes it serves us really well. But I am here to tell you that I have recently been humbled by little calcifications passing through my urethra. I hope to God I will never. Now, by nature, I'm not a very judgmental person, but I hope to God I will never again feel impatient or judgmental toward people who are addicted to opioids, people who are in chronic disease conditions. I hope I'll never feel even a little bit of spiritual arrogance again. Because these little incredibly tedious things, as painful as they are, can so erode you and your character and your sense of yourself and your confidence that pretty soon you don't even know who you are. My doctor gave me this Tylenol 3. It's the lowest dose, Tylenol with codeine. And I thought, I'm not going to take that. I'm an arrogant son. I said, well, last Sunday evening in the middle of the throw of trying to pass those big stones, I took it with joy and had to fight myself not to take another one. I don't feel spiritually defeated or destroyed, but I do feel incredibly humbled. And I hope that I learned that lesson. I hope that all of us are humbled. In the course of, I'm going to make this about us a little bit. It's a little personal, but there it is. You know, I mean, I think most of you know that I've preached against racism, sexism, homophobia from the beginning of my tenure over 10 years ago, over 11 years ago now at All Saints. And most of you, it's preaching to the choir. You responded beautifully. But it caused among us a certain amount of conflict. And there's some vacancies because of it, a few. And I've been told on a number of occasions that I brought my problems from the South to Staten Island, and you know that they didn't belong, and so forth, and implying that there was no real issue of racism on Staten Island. Well, you know, there was a lady at Ascension in one of my classes once, and Terry, I can't remember who it was. You might be able to, but I said something about, I used the phrase growing up in the Jim Crow South. And she said, well, I grew up in Jim Crow Staten Island.
Hey.
One of the things that I didn't have any great wisdom or insight, but that I've consistently said is that the bigger issue of racism is deep and systemic and horrible, but it's fueled by the little microaggressions, the discountings, the judgments, even the unspoken or unuttered ones that build up this matrix in our society, which is now, thank God, erupted. And people are not willing to tolerate it anymore. I can remember after I was so elated when Obama was elected. I never imagined I would live to see an African-American president any more than I ever imagined that Alan and I would live to be legally married in both church and state. So many things have happened that I didn't expect. I think after Obama was elected, I heard lots of people say, look, it's happening. Dr. King's vision, it's a post-racial America. Well, they're right. It is happening. But it's not a post-racial America, and it didn't happen quickly or easily, and it's not going to happen quickly and easily, because we're all going to have to do our part. We're all going to have to humble ourselves, and we're going to have to acknowledge that we are not nearly as evolved or developed as we think we are. And this COVID crisis and this crisis of racism in our culture and our society needs to set us back. It needs to check us in the forehead. It needs to say, stop, think, look, listen, pray, realize that we have to get deeply, deeply, deeply involved in our own psyches and root out any roots of these issues from ourselves and begin to have the courage to speak up and move forward, and not arrogantly think that in our generation, in our day, in our time, in our brief period, that we're going to completely transform things. Things are transforming faster than I ever imagined, but there's still deeper, more powerful things to be confronted. And the step that we have to take now in our spiritual maturation, our spiritual growing up, is not to overestimate our own interiority, our own power. And one of the signs of the spiritually mature person is that they don't become laissez-faire, they don't turn a blind eye to abuse or bad things, but they become profoundly non-judgmental. Profoundly non-judgmental, because they've been humbled and they know that they haven't the right to arrogance, spiritual or any other kind of arrogance. And a person who's becoming spiritually mature and is profoundly non-judgmental develops certain skills, the ability to communicate with people in a way that lifts them up instead of makes them feel judged or put down. When I was a little boy growing up in that Jim Crow South, there was a particular history teacher whom God rest her. She's dead. She was old as Methuselah then. She's the one I told some of you some time ago. She would constantly defend the Ku Klux Klan, that they were just helping the police to keep order, and that they didn't attack good Negroes, they attacked bad ones that were abusing their families, etc., etc. And she had this whole justification for the Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, as she called it. She considered herself quite a belle, quite a lady. And she was fairly wealthy. And I still can remember her so often out on the playground. And when she was the charge teacher during recess, when she would speak to the black kids, it was with this kind of incredible condescension. And I can remember on more than one occasion hearing her say, well, you poor people, you don't understand, and I guess you're doing the best you can. Just incredible condescension and arrogance. That kind of attitude is not perhaps as common or as obvious in most places as it used to be, but generations of living with that kind of arrogance, that kind of inflated sense of your own self-worth and ability, and using it as the foundation from which you degraded others who were different from you. As glorious as the history of this country may be, as much as we love to talk about the Boston Tea Party and Paul Revere's Midnight Ride and Washington crossing the Delaware and the Constitutional Convention and et cetera, all those things. I'm not saying that those were worthless or no good. They weren't. They were, in their time, a step forward. In their time, they produced a society that was much more, in the true meaning of the word, liberal, much more open, much more inclusive than the societies that they had come from in Europe. But there was and there is a deep, dark shadow. Colonialism, racism, the genocide of native peoples, incredible sexism, the persecution of those who are different, LGBT plus people. That's part of who we are. The reckoning is upon us. Not because God's punishing us, but because we have created for ourselves a situation in which we either face these pathologies together and we overcome them, or we die. We become extinct as a race. Because going forward, those pathologies are too expensive. We can no longer afford them. They degrade us, they tear us down, they destroy the moral fiber, they destroy any sense of integrity and interiority that we build up as individuals and collectively. And until and unless we face them fully and move beyond them to the amazing promise of the new land and begin to live in a true multiracial democracy, begin to very cautiously think about who we want to give power and authority in our society, until we re-establish the checks and balances, many of which have been destroyed in our society, until we as a people, as the foundation, as the grassroots of our democracy, refuse to cooperate with tyranny and understand what Dr. King said is true: if all of us are not free, none of us are free. If all of us are not free, none of us are free. We have to humble ourselves and admit we haven't done a very good job. Yes, we've made progress, but we've also ignored these hideous, festering pathologies. And this virus, which is completely amoral and impersonal and doesn't care about any of this, has added the pressure to the globe, to the planet, made the tenuousness of our lives so clear that these things are coming more powerfully to the surface and are demanding to be addressed, because it's clear if we don't address them, we don't cooperate. The irony of the mask wearing, the isolation, that we have to cooperate with one another in order to flatten this thing. The irony of that is overwhelming. All of us are being humbled. And like poor old Peter, oh, God knows his heart was so willing. He had big feet. He just wanted to walk on that water, and he did. It's important to remember he started to walk on the water. But the rage, the tempest around him, the storm, the strength of the wind, the COVID scared him. He lost confidence. He began to sink. His life was about to be forfeit. And he did what we must now do together. He called out, "Jesus, save me." And immediately a hand came. "Oh, ye of little faith. You had it, baby. You were doing fine." And they got in the boat. The wind stopped, and they went on their way. Let us all collectively cry out, "Jesus, save us." Get back in the boat, this little fragile boat that we all live in, this planet. The wind will stop. The COVID will be addressed in some way. And together we'll move forward. God willing. Amen.